Yeah, it's already.
Good morning, everyone. It's been 5 years since the NCTD and boards and trees. I'm not sure about you, but I find the tree a funny word to attach to an event that aims to educate, motivate, and inspire. So with that in mind, rather than engaging in trees, welcome to the 2024 NCTD Board Forward. Our day began bright and early with a gathering at South Tremont Street, the district's old headquarters, followed by a scenic ride to beautiful Swan Beach on our commuter rail line coaster. In addition to the special meeting, which we will begin in a few minutes after lunch, Board Forward will include tours of district facilities as well as rides on other NCTD modes. So here's to a meeting that's educational, motivational, and inspirational. Before I call the meeting to order, I would like to invite the mayor of Swan Beach, Lisa Healer, to deliver a few opening remarks. Thank you, Joel.
Everybody, thank you so much for being here. It's beautiful Solana Beach. Or is that feedback? Then we have microphone.
Okay, I'm Joel remarks saying again.
I'll just ignore it. Anyway, thank you for coming to Solana Beach. You're in one of our jewels, the Fletcher Cove Community Center. We've been able to enjoy the new view of our widened beach, 700,000 cubic yards of sand put on our beach from one end to the other, thanks to Thomas and Mike Levin, who provided the final piece of it. We've been working on it for over 20 years, and it was really a wonderful surprise to not just, hear that we got the money, but to actually see the sand on the beach. And we have new problems now, as I mentioned a couple of times, and that is where to put the beach volleyball courts. So Solana Beach, we are the second smallest city in all of San Diego County, just right above Del Mar, which is the smallest. We are 3.4 square miles. We have just under 13,000 residents, which according to Sandbag in 2050, we will lose 1,000. But we still have to build those 875 green acres. Yeah, we all know about that one. We are home to some pretty famous locations. One of them is the world famous Belly Up. I'm sure you've all been there before. The Belly Up this year is celebrating our 50th anniversary. You may not know this, but it was named many, many years ago by its founder, Dave Hodges, because when he opened the door, everybody said, "Oh, this place is going to Belly Up." Yeah, 50 years ago. We also have the North Coast Repertory Theater, not quite as well known, but quite as well. South Cedros, hopefully one day you'll come back and explore South Cedros as well as our beaches. We have a couple of new potlucks, one down here at Fletcher Cove Park and one at La Colonia Park as well, which we're kind of proud of. We do a playground with cost over $2 million. Right. The other thing about Solana Beach is you may have noticed that we are fortunate enough to have a lowered train track here. In what year was it? In 1995, the train station was moved from Del Mar to Solana Beach. After a lot of regional discussion about that, it was proposed to be here at Del Mar. It turned out just didn't have the adequate parking of the place to expand the parking which we need. Because as we know, this is mostly an Amtrak stop. We learned that quite clearly when the train tracks were closed to the north of us, and there wasn't a lot of commuter traffic there. It was almost all Amtrak, so we could see our parking lot was still there when the Amtrak was closed. But we, the Del Mar Fairground is one of the locations, and possibly that shows it. The property used to be where the parking lot is now, Solana Lumber. It was a siding where the lumber was unloaded, and that's why it's this really long, skinny, difficult piece of property that we have just a few lanes of parking all the way down. It was taken by eminent domain, went to a jury trial, and CTD won. Your attorney at the time was the Solana Beach president, so I got a little history of that recently as well. That was in 1995 when we acquired the train station. In 1999, the region invested $25 to $30 million, a lot of regional money, in lowering those tracks in Sawada Beach, which really helped, obviously, our local traffic situation. But a $25 to $30 million project was a big investment by the region, and we are grateful that it occurred for our city, and it really helps the flow of traffic as well as the train traffic as well. The other couple of things that we need to know about Sawada Beach is when were we a city? 1986, the same time that Encinitas became a city. So we're two of the youngest cities in the region. And we are, as I said, we're small. To put it into perspective, city of Encinitas, we are our whole city fits in one district. City of Encinitas. Actually smaller than one district in the city of Encinitas. We're also 109 times smaller than the city of San Diego. I did that math. Welcome to our tiny but beautiful city. Enjoy your day. You know, when Jewel arranges for an event, it's going to be great. That was a profession years ago. So thank you again. Enjoy your day. It sounds like it's going to be informative, informational, and appreciate this. I'm going to have to run off. I'm kind of jealous because I think you've got a number of great things in the program, but I got to do this one. Thank you.
Well, regardless of what Lisa said, I can't take any credit for setting this up for the tour that we're going to experience or for our launch. This was all arranged by our wonderful staff. So hands off to Sujal Rodriguez for and bye, Lisa. Thank you for the welcome. So at this time, I'd like to call to order the May 31st, 2024 special meeting of the North County Transit District Board of Directors. Before we begin, members of the public who may be viewing the meeting on the district's YouTube page, please note that in order to make a public comment during the meeting, you must connect to the meeting using the video provided on the agenda. In addition, you must also register by sending an email containing your name or phone number and the agenda item on which you wish to speak to clerk@nctv.org. I will now ask Sujal Rodriguez, our Uber assistant, the board to call roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair Edson,
Present.
Vice Chair Bob Patel. Here. Board Alternate Druper.
Here.
Board Member Kinsey. Board Member Garcia.
Here.
Board Member Robinson.
Here.
Board Member Desmond. Board Member Jenkins. Here. Board Member Contreras.
President.
Board Member Lee. This completes the roll.
Thank you, ma'am. Board alternate choice. Would you please read it?
Ready? Yeah.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Provide a safety brief and review evacuation.
Absolutely. In case of emergency, I will dial 911. In case of evacuation, please exit the building in the entrance doors. Once clear of the building, do not re-enter unless cleared to do so by emergency personnel. There is a fire extinguisher and an AED machine in the building, and staff on hand is trained on CPR procedures if needed. This concludes my safety brief.
Thank you. Sunil, are there any changes to the agenda?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And have any members of the public registered to provide comments specific to today's special meeting?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you. At this time, registration to speak on the special meeting agenda will end. Before we proceed, I have a couple of quick protocol items intended to keep our meeting running smoothly. First, I ask that board members please hold comments and questions until after each agenda item has been presented. And when the time comes for board member questions or comments, that you please raise your hand and wait until called upon to speak. Thank you for that. The first item on our agenda is a review of proposed modifications to the district's employee benefits. Sean Donaghy, our Chief Executive Officer, will present this item. Sean, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Really what we're here to kind of have a conversation about is one of the things I think we've had a conversation about in regards to our employees are where do our benefit plans and where does sort of our PTO and holiday things stack up in relation to other agencies, I think, in the state, but just in general, how we want to manage our employees and sort of the benefits that we want to put forward for them. And so specifically, just to get a little bit of background, we've been in that process for a little while, really identifying needs and modification for help and support. And a couple things are impacted by that. Health insurance benefits continue to go up, but frankly, the organization has not put the energy into trying to help shore up some of that the employee contribution to health insurance. The biggest piece I think we want to talk about today is at some point in time, the agency made the decision to actually pull back holidays that were approved by the federal government. One holiday specifically, which is why we brought it to this meeting today, is Juneteenth, which was approved by the president a few years back, but the organization has not pushed forward on that. These are sort of the things that we deal with when we talk about recruitment and retention, and I think we've had that conversation before, just about sort of where we stack up in terms of not only the salaries that we pay, but the competitive benefits factors we have. And just to give you my own personal perspective on it, it was a little bit of a change for me to go from an organization that contributed 100% to health insurance to coming here where the family plan was a fairly significant chunk of an employee's salary. And so we really want to try to find ways whenever possible to manage the business effectively, to be able to give back to the employees where we can, in addition to managing the service, because we think that sort of helps to shore up some of the issues that we have on recruitment and retention. As a result of the review of efforts, the district has determined that it presently does not recognize all state and federal holidays as paid holidays, specifically Juneteenth, Cesar Chavez Day, and the day after Thanksgiving. And the paid time off package is a little bit complicated and not necessarily competitive in terms of, we have two tiers. Even at the highest tier of PTO that we offer, we are one of the lowest PTO providers in the state. And the way we sort of manage that is, for us, our PTO bank that includes any potential sick time an employee may have. So when they need to take off for surgeries or some type of a long-term illness, sometimes that PTO is not readily available for them at the rate that they accrue. So the recommendation for today, and really only will impact Juneteenth in the fiscal year 24 year, but for the outlying years, and we've been very specific about this, any changes we make to PTO or any additions we would make to the plan would be subject to being within the budget that's approved already, and if it's not, then we would bring that back to the board. For fiscal year 2024, there is a financial impact to the organization to include Juneteenth in this year's holiday through the fiscal year, but that money will come directly from savings we've had on salaries and wages that for jobs that we've had open throughout the year. So it will be a neutral budget impact for this year. In future years, we'll match that to the budget. We will make sure that we manage our PTO policies and any holidays that we have. To sort of give you an idea of why this came to the board, we have a little bit of conflicting language in our policies. In the employee handbook, it states that the CEO has the authority to approve any federal holidays that were approved by the president. But then in the board policy, it states that if it has a financial impact to the organization, it should come in front of the board. I'm always a believer that when we talk about things that impact our employees, we want to bring that in front of our board members and sort of let them know the rationale behind why we're trying to do the things that we're doing. So that's the impact for this year would be approval of Juneteenth as a holiday, and for any subsequent years, Juneteenth would fall into that. But any other holidays that we would add or any changes to PTO would need to fall within the budget that you will present next month. It's approved by the board, and if it goes above and beyond that, we bring that back to the board for approval to change the budget range. And that's pretty much it, unless anybody has any questions for me.
John, I'm just curious, typically, in my experience, this seems to be part of contract negotiation. What holiday, how come? Why is this different?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I would say they typically are. What I found in contract negotiations over the past couple of years is it's more related to floating holidays and not necessarily national holidays. I think, interestingly enough, our bargaining units have not said anything about holidays that have been approved by the federal government. Now, those have historically always been loaded into a contract unless there's some type of a trade-off where they don't want the national holiday and they want a floating holiday to use throughout the year instead. And those are usually sort of the negotiating items we talk about when we're building CBA. If we have frontline employees that are, because we run service 365, they may want to put that in their own bank to use at a later date instead of just getting paid for it on a holiday most of the time. they use that, they want to use it as an additional holiday for themselves. So that's kind of the piece that fits into the CBA.
Oh, yeah, you brought up floating holidays. I was just going to ask, what the structure of the holiday would be like, so you kind of answered that a little bit, but I'll just say that I'm 100% in favor of moving forward. Especially since Juneteenth is just around the corner. I think it's critical that, this is the first time I hear that we're the lowest PTO benefits in the state. And that's a great concern to me. Yeah, you
Yeah,
answered my question.
we're one of
but
the
okay.
lowest. I don't know for sure if we're the lowest, but I think in comparison to some of our counterparts, at least in our industry, it's probably local. The amount of cap out days that someone would have at the top tier, it's not competitive with any other agencies.
Well, I appreciate you bringing this to us, and I'm very supportive.
And my comment was, is that, I think definitely we need to match our policy. We're policymakers, so we need to match our policy with state and federal recognitions. And so I'm supportive of it. I think we need to change our policy. We need to.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I would note what Director Robinson said. I think the dilemma for us a little bit is we know these holidays exist. There's a little bit of a difference between our administrative employees and the frontline employees who may use that holiday. So there's a couple ways they can do that in a bargaining scenario where they get paid 8 hours for the holiday, and then whatever they work on the holiday, they get paid also. Or when we sit at the table to talk about collective bargaining, they may want to take certain holidays and use them as floaters so that they can use them at their discretion when they want to do off property. So I 100% agree with you. I think, I think there was good rationale for why we did this a few years back. I know there was some shifts and changes that were made, but I think as we started to bring in some new employees and graduated from the pandemic, what we're finding is that we're a little less competitive on the benefit side than some of our counterparts, which have struggling. Sure.
I was just going to, normally I would ask a few members of the public just to comment before we move to board member questions, but that's fine.
That's my fault.
You're
We got Robert's rules back there.
Yeah. So, do any members of the public wish to comment on this item?
No, Madam Chair.
At this time, registration is, public registration is, item has ended, and board members Robinson, Jenkins, and Contreras, thank you for your comments. Usually they're identified for the record. But please proceed. You're doing a great job.
That's all I have, unless anybody has any other questions. Yes, sir.
So how does this, will this affect our schedule for buses, operations, et cetera?
No, the only thing that would really happen is a function of, at least in this year, by making Juneteenth a holiday, our frontline employees would essentially be paid for the holiday, but they would still work their regular schedule on the holiday if they were required to do so. It largely impacts administrative staff. The administrative office would be closed, but it won't impact our services. This is not a holiday where we would have a reduced service schedule, so we would run full service.
So it wouldn't be considered a holiday per se for overtime, et cetera, because don't we pay extra if we declare something a holiday?
It depends on the collective bargaining.
So what is it? You have any idea?
Each one's a little different. We have several, unfortunately, we have several collective bargaining agreements. So we have some units that don't have a current bargaining agreement. I would say in the case of bus operations, that is determined by MV, who negotiates that with the employees. On the rail side, there would be some additional overtime for.
Any more questions? Board Contreras,
So we're needing to do a motion on this. It's an action item or?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll go ahead and move approval. Staff's recommendation.
I would second that approval. I think it's really important that we authorize the addition of these paid holidays to attract a greater job applicant pool and to both retain and benefit our existing employees. So with that, Councilmember Joyce. Oh, Councilmember Joyce, I'm sorry.
Just really briefly, you spoke about benefits being something that you were a little shocked to find out the way that it's structured. benefits, medical benefits are extremely costly across all sectors. And that is really eating into the livability of our region. Can you provide some follow-up information about what a typical contribution looks like on a monthly basis?
Yeah.
If you don't have it at hand. You
No, I
send
can
it.
tell you exactly what it is.
Okay.
You and I have actually been working, and I want to give credit to you because one of the conversations we've had, which you'll see through the budget approval, is a shift of some of the money we saved from consultant work that we didn't need in 25. And you and her team pushed that into managing, giving that back to the employees, and it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about $500,750,000 is budgeted in the budget to shore that up. On a family plan, on standard, we have several plans through PERS right now, so you can kind of get about 10 different plans that exist. The lowest range for family is somewhere in the $1,800 range. The highest can be as high as $3,000. The contribution by the agency is roughly $1,300, a little more, maybe $1,350. Our plan is through the budget approval process is to for a family plan, they'll probably see somewhere in the neighborhood of a $200+ savings on their contribution to insurance. Like I can only speak for my own plan, which is a family plan on the first goal, which is the middle tier. My contribution is somewhere in the neighborhood of $700. So if I'm a frontline employee and I'm coming in the door and I have to absorb a $350 pre-tax hit, to make sure that my family has health insurance, that's a pretty heavy load for someone to carry, and we want to try to drive that burden down as much as we can. And we picked that number sort of arbitrarily because we did the math on it and we looked at some of the contracts we had out there that we probably weren't going to use in 25, and we were looking for savings throughout there to try to get those. Really appreciate the question.
I have one more comment, and some folks might not agree with this, but, one of the things that I did at my city is we ended up putting universal health care on our legislative platform, in particular, because it's so difficult, in terms of paying for healthcare. So that's something I might bring up in the future, but, I know it's maybe outside of the realm of usual course of business, but I really think that the more folks, agencies and municipalities are really saying, hey, we need to have some kind of universal healthcare for folks. That's something that when we talk about legislative platform, I would like to have a little bit of conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
With that, no further questions, correct? Okay. Motion by Contreras, second by Benson, please call the vote.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? On the motion of Board Member Contreras, seconded by Board Chair Edson, to authorize the Chief Executive Officer to modify employee benefits package, motion passes.
Thank you. And before the short, if there are any other items which is having to forward these.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. The next 4 items on our agenda are informational and will not require a vote. Mary Jo, Chief of Staff, will be presenting item 2 and an update on intergovernmental affairs. Mary, you have our attention.
Thank you, Jim. Good morning, members of the board. I'm here to give a very high level, very brief overview of what's going on at the federal and state level, some guides into your discussions today, and then hopefully set inform some of the future budget discussions and other policy priority discussions we have as a board. So first, on the federal side, we are going through the appropriations process for FY25 at the federal level. We have requested some specific community project funding and congressionally directed spending requests from our senators and our members of Congress. Those requests are to fund bus stop improvements across the district. We were lucky to have Congressman Peters advance one of our requests, so that will fund bus stop improvements in Escondido and San Marcos. We are waiting on the senators to choose projects. Their process typically takes a little bit slower than the House, but what's next up in this process is our requests go through the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Subcommittee. They're slated for a hearing in June, and then the full subcommittee in the House will hear all of the earmark requests as well as the budget as a whole sometime in July. The Senate again moves a little bit slower, so we expect to be there. It's called colloquially with THUD. Their THUD appropriations process will start probably likely in July. Also, obviously, it's 2024, it's an election year. For California specifically, that means that we'll have a new senator post this November election. Neither of the candidates in the race have a really well-documented transit portfolio, so we'll be interested in hearing what their stance is on supporting public transit, especially as it pertains to the surface transportation reauthorization. The bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed in 2021 reauthorized all of the funding programs at the federal government level, including some policy priorities. The BIL expires in 2026. So conversations will really begin in earnest about reauthorization of that in 2025. But as an agency, we're starting to look at our operations as a whole, our funding levels to determine where we might want to advocate for additional funding, move around in funding, and maybe some policy priorities as well. At the state level, the state is going through a similar budget exercise. They have a different fiscal year, as we all know, starts July 1st. So the governor released a budget proposal called the May Revise. The legislature countered with some of their priorities. The state right now has a $27 billion budget deficit, which is expected to be similar numbers in the out years. One of the most important pieces is our SB 125 funding, which is for the transit capital projects and zero emission capital projects. The first tranche, year one, is frozen at the moment. You heard this at the Performance Administration Finance Committee, as well as I believe last board meeting. We're still waiting to hear on whether that and when it will be unfrozen. For the out years, we're also waiting to hear what the legislature determines will happen with those funds. It's looking like they will just defer that. So that's the budget across the board. Another important piece of legislation at the state level pertaining to NCTD is SB 1098. It's from Senator Blakespear. She also is the chair of a low standing rail corridor resiliency subcommittee at the state level in the state senate. This bill in particular aims to commission 2 studies to look at the capital needs of the corridor and then how to optimize operations. We've worked really well with the senator and her staff to determine what this means for us long term and how we ensure that we're not duplicating the efforts that are already going on at the state level. That was just passed in the Senate and it's now in the Assembly to be assigned. We also receive a lot of discretionary grant funding from the state level. Again, as we all know, the gas tax is going to expire. So we're looking at ways that we can find additional sustainable revenues to fund not only our TDA, Transportation Development Act funding, as well as all of these discretionary grant programs passed through Senate Bill 1. Leading into discretionary grants, we have $130 million in discretionary grants pending. These applications, I should say, they will fund spur double tracking efforts to advance that project so that we can clear the environmental phase and start getting money for the final design. We also just submitted an application for the Eastport to Shell double track project in the city of Oceanside. That will replace the San Luis River Bridge. We have a pretty significant maintenance obligation, and there's a slow order on that bridge currently. So it's super important that we replace that bridge and get some of the additional operational improvements on the Amtrak Pacific Circle services. As we mentioned, SB 125, we're still waiting on the state to get us the information on when that funding will be unfrozen, if it's unfrozen, what the out year funding looks like, the full funding for San Diego double track phase 2, and especially the platform side. Upcoming grant programs, we have the transit oriented development planning program from the FTA. I'm working with Tracy's team on putting together an application for that to advance some of the TOD projects. Railroad crossing elimination is important. I know that Sandbags had conversations with the city of Carlsbad about possibly the trench. We also have an MOU with the county for great exploration of the William Creek area on the Sprinter corridor. And then a couple other big ones are the Fed State Partnership and the RAISE grant program. Those fund very large rail or multimodal projects. And I will pass it back to the chair, and then I'm available to take any additional questions.
We did that one more time.
Right.
That's kind of a workshop.
Yeah.
It's really a lot of fun. So now, do any members of the public wish to speak on this item?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you. At this time, public opportunity to speak on this item has ended. Do any board members have any questions for Contract?
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation. I didn't get to take a look. Do we have a list of the bus stop improvements?
We do, yeah, so working with Katie's planning team and then Tracy's facilities team, we're determining, so we requested for Congressman Peters, it was a little over 700,000. With that, we promised that we'd make 20 bus stop improvements. So we're picking high priority bus stops, the highest ridership routes, as well as ones that maybe don't have an existing shelter right now, no rider information. And then we're determining what the level of effort is going to be at each bus stop. So we could pick one that has high ridership, but it needs a sidewalk, and we have to pick that in the bus. So it's an iterative process, but they have to be, for that one at least, they have to be.
Yes, and so for the bus stop improvements that we are making, with this funding is the burden of maintenance and rebuilding all with NCT. Sometimes, municipalities take the, so I'm just trying to figure out.
Maintenance of the stop and the shelter at least are elevation. However, the sidewalk and the infrastructure surrounding these things.
We have different MOUs with different cities that have a variety of different obligations. But generally speaking, what Mary outlined is.
Okay, and this list, is that provided anywhere? Do you want to see? I didn't get to see the book, so.
We have finalized, yeah, we can make it available.
Yeah.
So it's probably once it's passed, so we know that.
Right.
Actually, that the amount of funding, because last year we had a request and it was slash, so. Yes, once it's passed. we pass.
Perfect, yeah, I'd love to see that. And then just another thing on the bus stop improvements, and I don't believe that this is in Congressman Pierce's district, but over there going to Paula Valley off SR 76. I have seen folks that are working in the orange grove and the orchards over there, and they have no shade, no bus stop. And so that's something, I'm sure I really would like to see us trying to do some improvements over there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great. The other thing, okay, last thing is the Gwinnett Creek Sprinter Station. Where are we on in that process? Or do we have conceptual development? Are we getting closer to engineering? It sounds like maybe not.
So we're at the MOU, so we have like.
Okay.
So what we'd be seeking funding for and what we submitted an application last year was to start the process. So
Okay.
what it would look like, whether it's phrasing, whether it's touching, the environmental considerations, it would be, what the funding that we would request would be to start the process.
Okay, so kind of along where the Vista Village Sprinter Station, we're looking at.
Right,
So the first plan, so that's what we're looking to do at Gwinnett Creek, so we can start that. 'Cause I think the plan was to look at from York to Gwinnett Creek and potentially elevate that.
Yes, all
Yeah.
those very strange.
Right.
Crossings that are there.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Those are my questions.
Any other questions for Mary?
No, thank you, Mary. He's very informative. Good questions. Thank you. Next on our agenda is an overview of the district's strategic priorities. Our CEO, Sean Donahue, will be presenting this item. Welcome back, Sean.
Thank you. So I think we've talked a lot about, even through the budget process, we talk about things like strategic priorities. And I think at times when we come to the board and we talk about strategic priorities, they're a little less about strategic priorities and they're a little more about strategic projects that we're working on in the realm of public transit. And so what we really want to try to do is sort of drive those down to sort of some key attributes that the agency would have to talk about when we talk about strategic priorities. And for us, that's kind of our North Star, which is on 5 kind of tiers. It's world-class customer experience, safety and security, our fiscal duty to the agency and the community, equity, environmental and economic justice when we're working through projects, community, government and governmental stewardship, and really our team. I always think it's important. I think agencies occasionally miss the boat by not putting their employees into the strategic priorities, because when they build projects out, they don't really think about how the employee is affected when someone comes to the table with a great project, and they don't understand the resources that are needed for the employers, or they don't factor in how many more employees we need or how that will have an impact on the department. And so when we think about these historic strategic priorities that we have that are project related, we need to think about how all of these things are sort of managed within that sphere. I won't go through all these, just to give you some examples of like in the world-class customer experience, safety and security piece. On the service piece for us, it's improved frequency and reliability, building for service expansion, which we know from our conversations on the budget that our current budget does not allow service expansion for us without the identification of additional future funding sources. Grow the customer experience. What does that mean? That's a lot of different things. That's real-time information for our employees. That's app-based for those who want it. That's continued call center service that our customer service team does an amazing job with. It's how do we really sort of sync all of our projects and programs together to make sure that the customer experience is the best it can be. Explore the ability to manage corridor and planning studies independently. One thing that's a little bit of a struggle for us from an agency perspective is when we want to talk about things that are specific to the district's corridors or planning studies, we have to do those in conjunction with SANDAG. And that potentially creates problems for us. We either are not on the priority list, or by the time you get to that part, they're far more expensive than they were when we first wanted to explore them. And they could be things as simple as traffic studies in some cases, or what space would we want to look at, high capacity bus transit, or when we want to change. Like when we talk about the 15 corridor and how MTS's purple line may connect to something with us further on down the road. It's difficult for us to think about managing that in the context of SANDAG because when our project sort of hits that list, occasionally it gets pushed down the ladder a little bit. And I don't think that's fair to the agency, one, but I don't think it's a fair representation of what our county needs to manage its growth and expansion. On the safety and security side, upgrade a positive train control system. I think we have the oldest positive train control system in the United States of America. So we need to work on that. Continued focus by the district sheriff's team. We do a good job of getting out. They do a phenomenal job. Chris Correa is here today, runs our security department, our director of security. We've got a really good presence out there in the field, but it's continuing to add to that. And it's continuing to manage how we want our safety and security to not only enforce transit rules, but help passengers and also help the communities that we serve when we're at those transit stations. Additional security on service and transit centers, and that's a big deal for us. You will see when the budget comes back, we've actually added money to the security budget. Karen is working on that, really from the aspect of how can we better have a presence in the transit centers from a security standpoint, more hours of the day, so we're working through some of those things. On the fiscal duty side, we need to continue to pursue additional funding sources, actively and aggressively find grant opportunities for capital. And Mary's done a really good job of sort of putting a plan together for maybe how to do a little more of that in-house and aggressively write our grant requests and partner with cities. And grant requests are not necessarily specific to us. We want to help out some of our partners, anybody that's a part of the district or North County. We want to make sure that we're helping the cities and supporting them on their initiatives, writing letters of recommendation or helping support grant opportunities for those cities as well, even if they're not necessarily transit related. Focus on management of consultants. I don't think it's any secret that we've used a lot of consultants to do some of our transitions and manage some things. I think we have an extremely well-versed team in-house, and we've had a lot of conversations with our finance team about what consultants we need. We've already trimmed down a fair amount of that for the budget that's going to get approved hopefully next month at the board. Evaluate fare simplification, probably specifically on coastal fare zones. The one thing that can really be a barrier is when you have lots of different fare structures for anything really, and the coaster, and specifically with the coaster, I mean, we've got 3 different fare zones. That can get a little confusing for customers, especially when we're doing fare enforcement. I think we need to try to simplify that a little bit and figure out what we're doing. This is a big one for us. Seek Sprinter replacement funding now. I know that we have had some conversation about the 2035 mandate to switch over, but the reality is, and I'm just throwing a number out, if it's 150 million now to replace our Sprinter fleet, it'll be 300 million in 2035. We need to aggressively try to find funding to switch out our vehicles now, and then continue to work on items like positive train control along the Sprinter line and sort of work those things backwards. My biggest fear is that if we continue to put this off, we will get to a space in 2035 where the agency either won't have the grant money, the local match, or the support needed to be able to replace the vehicles. And let's forget about 2035 from the perspective of low or no emission. The reality is we have a one-off boutique rail that is, I think, the only one of its kind. There might be one other one in the world, but we're having difficulty finding parts for it, as some of our board members have experienced just today. We have some reliability issues along that line. We need to shore those things up. And the best way to do that is really to start attacking sprinter replacement funding. Shift in local, regional, federal. We need to explore opportunities to manage projects in-house versus the NPO. That's not to suggest that the NPO shouldn't handle any of our projects like they do now. I just think there's an opportunity for us on some of our smaller projects to manage those in-house and do them as a function of North County, which are specific to North County and not necessarily to the region. Because again, understanding the impacts of alternative fuels on the agency is a huge deal. We're in a space right now, and I think we talked about it at the last board meeting, where we essentially have a portion of our bus fleet sitting in the lot right now because it would cost us $70 a kilogram to have a gas form hydrogen trucked into the building until we get our liquid station up and running. And I think the bigger piece for us when we talk about these things are we want to be a part of those solutions, but what we don't want to have happen is the infrastructure we can't afford, either initially to put it in or to continue the upkeep on the infrastructure. And at what point in time does the cost of alternative fuels have an impact on the service that we're putting on the street for our customers? And so I think we're very aware that we want to make sure we do those things and that we're leaders in that arena, but we also have to make sure that it's not at the expense of service for our customers at large. Understand workforce and affordable housing impacts on developments. I think we've had a lot of robust conversation about that. A lot of great feedback, I think, from board members that I've had conversations with about those two things specifically, and our elected officials at the state level. And so we need to think about those things when we manage policy going forward. From a service perspective, we need to manage service needs for essential workers. I think one thing you'll see in our Sprinter corridor, which is probably why we need to continue to focus and escalate our energy on Sprinter vehicle replacement, is we have a pretty solid ridership in that corridor, and I think we continue to have that through the pandemic on the Sprinter line and several of our bus lines that have essential work through the 70 corridor. So we want to continue to make sure that we're looking at that from a planning perspective. Building frequency for access for jobs, education, and healthcare. You know, the biggest piece that we don't want to be a barrier is if someone wants to age in place, they don't have to move closer to healthcare. They have a robust transit system to get them there and let them live and age in place if they want. For our younger folks, or for any folks really, access to education, and then that second step to access to the job once they've sort of moved on from the education piece. And then focus on the youth opportunity pass and also supporting local economies. We talked about that too, that from an agency perspective, we can't just be focused on public transit. We need to make sure that our communities are successful, whether that's through robust transit options or whether that's through projects that exist outside of transport. On the community and governmental stewardship piece, we continue forging partnerships for creating short and long-term successful outcomes for communities. That's a big deal for us. It goes back to sort of a couple other bullet points that were in there. The partnerships for us are just bigger than, hey, how can we help you put a bus stop here? Or what can we do to help you with a rail station? It's really pushing projects for communities that are out there for successful outcomes. Build relationships with the business communities. The best example is, and big credit to Chris on this one, the work that he did on the Sorrento Valley Coastal Connection to bring our partners in Sorrento Valley together to try to offset the cost of that service. We're going to look to do more of those things, but we need to really build on our relationships with the business community because they're relying on us to make sure we can get what they're doing. Attend community events and expand involvement at the city, county planning levels. That's a big deal for me. I'm used to being at events that City Hall, whether that's a parade, whether that's a job fair. And we probably need to do a better job of getting out to those events and being present to support the initiatives that they have. And the expanded involvement at the city county planning levels is, we've already started to do it a little bit. Mary and I have been hitting the road. We want to talk to your city managers. We want to talk to your city planning development team. We want to know when you have sort of these long-term plans that might impact transit, where we can get in early and have conversations about what that means for all of us collectively together. We may be able to help find additional funding sources through transit. There's just a lot of opportunity. The local, state, federal partnership level, relationships with FTA, FRA, DOT, and elected officials to enact policy change is key. I think you're seeing that right now. There's a lot of money available through BIL. And the relationships that we have with FTA, FRA, and DOT with the backing of the elected officials is sort of what puts us in really the driver's seat to be aggressive for those funding mechanisms. Provide feedback to the federal on federal reauthorization funding opportunities. That's a big deal for us because reauthorization sort of rewrites the script, and I think Mary talked a little bit about this, that that's who we are and who we're going to be from a funding perspective, at least at the federal level, for however many years they decide to put that into place. And so it's critical to get in well before the elected officials have conversations about what's important to them. We need to get in front of them. We need to talk to them about what's important, get those opportunities on the table. And then that last one down there, which wasn't hidden by design, I don't know what happened there, but low sand opportunities. I really appreciate Jewel Edson's comments at the last low sand meeting we had in Sonoma Beach, where we had a conversation about the impact about the low sand corridor in particular, that while I'm not totally sure there's the same emphasis on issues when there's a blockade at the low sand corridor of people coming south as much as there is going north. And I think the San Diego County and maybe even to some extent some portions of Orange County are significantly impacted northbound and from an economic perspective when there's a blockage at, say, the last one we had San Clemente. I'm not sure that that effort is necessarily at the same level that we have or anything north of that coming south. I think they see themselves as sort of self-sustaining within that corridor, and so we need to really think about what our responsibility is in future low sand opportunities, either from a capital or construction perspective or operation of the corridor itself. And then the last one is our team. Resources and staffing is a big one. Employees must have the tools necessary to be successful. A big piece for us is succession planning for future leaders, learning and development opportunities available for all of our employees, manage our organizational structure effectively, which goes back to making sure that we have the right people in the right places when we come for a budget. Frontline employee safety and security. And that bottom one there, we are, for all the positions we had open a few months ago, we only have one position at the executive level that we're interviewing for now that is open. We're hoping to have that filled in the next couple of weeks. The amount of jobs that were open on our website, and big credit to Karen and the HR team, we are down to probably the lowest level of open jobs we've had in a long time. Is it single digit, pretty close to single digits?
Close.
Close.
So close.
And I can only speak from when I came on board. We were at 30 something plus open positions. We're right now right around that 10 range. And all of our executive positions have been filled with the exception of bus operation, the chief operations officer of bus, which we're in the middle of interviews for. So big deal there. And then the employee benefits piece, which we already talked about, so I won't go through that too much. And that is, anybody has a question?
There will probably be questions.
After public.
Yes.
The members of the public registered on items.
Yeah.
We have one.
So I'm gonna slip after.
We have a secret characteristic.
So speaking as a member of the public, as, first of all, it's really exciting to hear about the new direction and some of the resets that are going into place. I think this agency is really going to benefit from it, as well as everybody that's served by NCTD. I would urge the board, as a member of the public who lives near the Oceanside Transit Center and who's very familiar with the community that lives there, at every single meeting about the Oceanside Transit Center development, there were big questions about the community benefit with the new development. And so I would just urge this board to really lean in, because that is a critical development, not only for our city, but for this agency. And there are still big questions that need to be answered. So please engage and don't let it come to a bad ending. Let's make sure we get all of those answers, those questions answered ahead of time.
Thank you for those comments. Are there any of the public speakers who wish to?
Nothing further.
Okay, thank you. At this time, registration to speak on my period is ended. Okay. Which ones I have a few questions, but I think I'll let those look first. Anything down here? No.
So, if I remember back in 2019, the staff put together a whole strategic initiative, et cetera. Is this a follow-on to that? Is this, where does that stand?
Yeah, I would say it's a refinement of that. I think the one thing that we talked about at a staff level was the strategic priorities that we put together are probably a little closer to ground level than strategic. They're very specific to either, in some cases, either projects that exist or do exist versus sort of a strategic direction for the agency when we think about what we should be doing through projects.
And how are you going to manage these? How are you managing this in terms of making sure you do come through? That was one of the things that was talked about at that point, was having, actually, there was the idea of having a strategic officer at that point. So what is the house to manage these to make sure they actually happen?
Yeah, I would say we're going to keep track of those through the projects. And then the best example I can give you is in the previous strategic priority set, and when you look at some of our previous budgets, there's very specific mentions of projects that are in there. And there may be very legitimate reasons why those projects did not come through. And so to sort of baseline that as a strategic priority, maybe a little bit too deep in the weeds. I think for us, when we look at a project, we want to make sure that it touches all 5 of these points and that we can manage that. Like, we may have these bullet points up here, but every project is going to have its own specific sort of impact within each one of these categories. So when we finish a project or when we bring a project forward, the staff will look at every single one of those and make sure that we're hitting all the right ones.
So these are more organizational than actual projects.
Yes.
And so the question is how are you going to manage the organization rather than the specific projects?
Yeah, the organization will be tied back to the projects. So when we do a project, the success of that project will be determined on how many of these things that we were able to effectively build into that project, if we can, put a number to the effectivity of that project once it's completed through some of these strategic priorities. And really question, I think, at a more philosophical level, we have a project that totally misses 2 or 3 of these, and we really have to ask ourselves why we're doing that project. And I would say from my experience in transit, occasionally that happens. Somebody has a great idea and we start digging into it, and what we find is that while it seems like a great idea, it provides very little value at the end to what we're really trying to accomplish as a public transit agency. And so that's where these kind of fit in. We need to be able to sort of actively say, this is how our team is effective. These are the community groups that we've talked to either in the public process or with our electeds to try to find funding effective. And I think those are the successes or failures within those projects. I think that's how we know.
I'm gonna ask all Joe's questions. Look at his notes. I'm really smart. No, I think it was under your service bullet. You talked about it was, just caught my attention, education. Where was it? Somewhere in there was about one of those things. So the word educational, education, whatever. So more of a statement probably than a question, but I don't know. You know, it's great having rail that goes to Palomar College and some other, but there's a lot of educational facilities that aren't served by rail. And let's just be ferocious out here, Coastal College, or some of our larger trade schools that are very popular. And in that area, hopefully there's planning or there'll be something done to help link those rail and get students to those destinations that aren't served by rail. I'll take a breath there in case you wanted to say something.
Well, I think you're exactly right. I would say this organization is no different than a few other organizations that are out there where we're very heavily reliant on this red, yellow, green efficiency. And it's bigger than that, right? Like I think an example I gave when we were having a conversation before was, I believe this is about 347 because between Palomar College and San Marcos. And technically, if you're just looking at it on paper, we should probably not have that route because it's the lowest performing system. I would argue it's one of the most important routes in our system because it provides access between the community college and the main campus. And so in order for us to do that, it requires us to back up and not use ridership as the generator for success. Right? There are equity scores that exist that could be a reason why a route may be successful. There may be disadvantaged communities that are landlocked. And I think for us, when we move off of the ridership number itself, we have to be able to clearly explain to all members of the public that this is why we see the benefit. There's a rationale for us going by the schools. There's a rationale for us doing the things that we need to do that don't exist in a passengers per hour or the ridership type scenario. And I think when we're able to do that, we're able to better have larger conversations about how we're connecting the next generation to jobs access. So our planning department, I think, has done a really good job of that. It's just sort of graduated to that next space. So it's not always going to be based on, you know, the statistical data tells us a story about a couple of things, but it's not always just about the ridership. It's about the impact of that person.
Thank you. And then the second kind of thought is, and again, I admit my ignorance to this, I don't know how it all works with school districts, and I'm not providing buses and transportation and safe passage to school. But we got for our younger riders, our younger kids in elementary, middle schools, things like that. I don't know what the role is of NCTV in helping get those kids safely to their destinations. So.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think from the Youth Opportunity Pass perspective, I think that's a great start for us. I think some of the conversations we've had is, are there inherent barriers within the Youth Opportunity Program where they have to get stuff from the parent, where they have to find an opportunity to get a piece of paper signed or get a pass, and how do we sort of manage those things a bit bigger than that? Probably a decade ago, it wasn't uncommon for school districts to enter into conversations with the public transit agency about some type of a monetary give and take on school service. I would say, much like public transit, we have a full understanding that the school districts are struggling now more than they have historically all across the United States. And so to go to the table and ask them for certain things that are not specific to certain school runs is probably a tough sell to school boards, probably a tough sell to superintendent who's already looking at a budget and trying to figure out what they need to do. But from a planning perspective, we always look at those, you know, what schools are impacted by a certain route, is there a spot that we're missing? We've had a lot of conversations about the question side, specifically about the middle school, elementary school, and sort of the proximity within I-5 and the directions they need to go. I think we need to look at those at a bigger level.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So one of the things that I talk a lot in my city and SMD is about the importance of having a safe and clean city. And if you don't have a safe and clean city, you don't want to live, right? So I kind of take that now to safe and clean stations and buses and rail. And one thing that I consistently hear from my residents in Escondido is that there continues to be a sense of being unsafe at the Escondido Transit Center. And I drive by at all kinds of hours, in the morning, early in the afternoon, late at night. I've spoken with employees, I've spoken with supervisors, and it continues to come back to. And one of the things that, and while I appreciate the incredible work that our security teams does and our deputy sheriffs, I don't see much presence at all throughout the day at different times in Escondido. And I think that definitely contributes to this sense of being unsafe. So I'm glad that there's some mention that we'd like to increase that area in the budget. I would like to see that. I think that we need to do something about that. There's other aspects I'm sure that they can work on to help continue to help our riders feel safer. And the reality is in Escondido, we have a very high ridership. And I was speaking with Councilmember Contreras, and she was mentioning to me that there's a very high percentage of Escondido residents that don't have access to a vehicle. So they really have no choice but to have to ride public transportation. And you're aware of what happened to me today, that I was gonna ride the Sprinter to our meeting, and I got up early and drove to the station and sat in the Sprinter, and then got announced it's been canceled because of mechanical issues. Now, I just got back in my car and drove to the Oceanside. But there are people that can't do that. And I mean, what are they gonna do? Arriving an hour, 2 hours early just in case it breaks down. So I think those are issues that impact this whole clean and safety that I'd like to look at, because if they feel that the service is inconsistent, it's gonna affect the ridership and the trust. So this is more of a statement. I'm excited to see that we're working on that, but I would like to see something happening that would, I've been talking about this for over a year now. I would like to see in this year I haven't seen much of a change. I'd like to see a quicker change rather than just working on it.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments, and I'll be the first to say that perception is reality in the without a redirect. I remember the first conversation that you and I had about going out there later in the evening and walking around. Some of the conversations that we've had internally were very specific to not just in the security realm, but the lighting that our transit centers have. Oceanside is an example of this. You know, we have these old infrastructure setups with the lighting. What we really need to do is use the higher visibility LED, brighten really the transit platform, because once it's bright, it looks accessible, people are going to start to see safety aspects of it. Because if the perception is dark transit center, they don't see a lot of people other than drivers walking around. Who's here with the kid? One thing that you will see when we go on the tour today is the building that is on Escondido Transit Center property. We're actually going to have the tenant. We're going to vacate that lease. We're going to turn that into a public service center. So we'll have our sheriff's team, security on site there, in addition to some of the improvements we want to do with lighting. That's a big deal for us, especially that being sort of the first largest transit center out in the east. And we're going to work on the same thing at our session. When we walk around today, we're going to sort of point these things out. These are things that we need to bring back. We need some immediate action on our transit centers. You know, to Tracy's credit, we brought our custodians back in house. That was by design. We want people on our platforms to clean them all day. We're going to be back and forth to platforms to clean them. So I think once we sort of get all that set up, and moving forward, we'll be pretty quick. You're going to see what I hope is important.
And this, that's great. That's great news about making that area to be something that would make a great impact. Hours of operation for that would be when we have bus and rail service, or is that a 9 to 5? How long?
No, I think our sheriff's team works kind of around the clock, just at different shifts. We have a couple different ways we sort of, that Chris manages that team and their schedules. From a security standpoint, the reason that we beefed up the security in there is because we would rather have a static presence at the transit centers. While there's hours of operation, I think for us, while we're not going to pretend there's not issues in the middle of the day, the reality is we want people there early in the morning to manage the expectation on the platform, even late in the evening and last pull out so that we have an opportunity to make sure that those customers see our employees and see the ambassadors, either through our security team on the platform.
Madam Chair, if I may, just want to keep everyone on time. We have about 30 minutes remaining for discussion and the next two items. We're anticipated to end at 8.
So if we can make our questions very brief and expect 3 for responses, and we have a board. That's right, Steph. Maybe follow up a little bit.
We'll be the narrator on the.
Or we could go into some of our lunch hours.
Yes, yeah.
Because some of them we need an hour to lunch.
Yeah, so I think we'll be on.
So I have a few questions. So you mentioned about collaborating with Sanday, and I think we also need to remember that we have 9 board members, 9 agencies represented here on North County Transit. And so how can we utilize our Sanday rep how can we better inform them when we need some help with something? So that would be one comment. And then you and Mary both mentioned an acronym, EIL. What is that?
Oh, it's the bipartisan infrastructure. Sorry.
Okay.
We're all acronyms.
I know. And then there was a comment about that we have the oldest PTC system. So if I remember correctly, we were one of the first to come online with the PTC. So that didn't mean when we came online with that, we had a new system. We've had an old system that what does that mean?
We had
an old system.
We had one of the original systems that we put in when we first did. So for us, it's been a little bit of a struggle to, Justin's team has really worked around the clock. Some of the managing that software, that continual update of software, what we have from an infrastructure perspective. We need to think long term about how we're going to update.
Okay, so we put in one of the older systems.
Oh, no, it was still the time.
It was new times.
Still the
Okay,
time.
okay.
We had an original version of what would become everyone's. We're still operating out of the original.
Okay.
Like your art from, right?
Okay.
It's available.
Okay, and then you made a comment along the way about trimming down some of the consultants. I just want to say I fully support that because we have an amazing staff. And if you analyze what we're paying outside consultants to do, and we can have the current staff or bring in staff to do it more efficiently, we might save money on it, and we might get better results.
Agreed.
Have our own people.
I think there's a space for consultants when the small time frame we have is to get a great deal of information that would not probably be advantageous during that work. But I think what we look at from a budgetary perspective is we have some consultants that are telling us what we ask them to give us in a scope. And if we have employees that know how to write the scope, they're probably going to find an answer. So I think we would prefer put that back on the employee there.
Yeah. And then, last question, you mentioned about managed land use and transit projects. Are you talking about our transit projects and our land use that we own across the corridor, or managing when the cities have transit projects?
I would say it could be both. I would say, like if the city is working on a road project, we need to be involved in that because we will be impacted by however that road is shifted, or if we need to put in bus cutout because we'll block traffic as a result of the change. Oceanside, probably a good example. We've had a lot of conversations about roundabouts. How does that impact public transit? But it's also public transit projects. It's our projects. You need to be very specific about the land that we know, what we're doing with that and what our intention is as an agency, as a board, as employees, what we really want to do. The projects we have currently and any peripheral items we have.
So, two comments on this, and one of them we've already talked about previously. And that is, I think when the city, when the project goes out for this development, it would be helpful if North County Transit was a little more specific about what they want within that project. So that the cities go back to the developer and say, and coordinate with North County Transit to say, we only need you to do this. So I think that's important. We've already had that conversation. And then the other thing is talking about our plan and these different projects. I think staff needs to keep in mind that many of the cities go through general plan updates and give very specific, valuable input as to what transit would like to see in those projects, or how, and as part of the update, have you thought about this in this area? So, because a lot of it affects zoning.
Totally agree.
Yes.
So your desire to take part in the regional, that means you're gonna be at all of our planning meetings?
Yeah, I think all of us and our staff, I think we want to have a presence at council meetings when we're talking about redevelopment. I think we want our planning staff and other members of our team to be involved with the local TD, like local transit development plans, or even bills. I mean, we went so far at one point at another agency where we were coded on emails for any large development that took place so that we could contact that developer in the city and say, here's what we would like to see from the transit perspective. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. If you do, it's easier for us to do it on the front side and you come back and later.
Yeah, and I'm not sure it's necessarily at the council level per se, but I think it's more staff meeting once or twice a year with the city manager and definitely the development director, because they know these projects coming down the line. And I think a lot of it is a staff situation. You don't want to go to council development discussions.
All right, that's it. Okay, I know that Vice Chair Boxell will speak before I call her, and I will come back to speak before you shut us. I wanted to introduce two people that have joined us. Melissa Newton, the new city manager of Long Beach, and coming to us from San Diego County, where she has City of San Diego, sorry. I'm trying to forget your old job.
That's fine.
But she has a great amount of experience in areas that really touch on what Kansas City does. And we have Robin Wagner from Sandow. So we can, if you want to back Sandow.
I gave you some time.
Very nice.
Vice Chair Boxell.
Sure, mine are very quick, so we'll be able to get to Board Member Contreras. I just wanted to underscore what Board Member Joyce had brought up regarding development, because we're also going to have some up and coming in Carlsbad, and so just to continue to make sure we have a really good partnership and conversation around what will end up going, there, and just making sure that the community is involved in the conversation. I also wanted to emphasize what Member Robinson said regarding transit to our education corridors, especially. I think those are so important. I hear from young people that I work with all the time that getting there sometimes, especially if they don't have a car, can be a challenge. So just wanted to mention that one. And then of course, as somebody who grew up in Carlsbad, we've never had a bus system. And so I think, I know that's a very long-term project. I don't think that's something that will be solved immediately, but I just wanted to mention that, gosh, if we can find a solution to that, not of course, just as an agency ourselves, it would have to be in conjunction with all the others. I think it would solve a lot of woes for a lot of parents everywhere. So those were my two comments that I just wanted to make.
So before we move forward, I just want to mention that the final item, presentation item is gathering the same information. So if you've already said it now, you don't have to say it now. Okay. Because there is lunch and a bus and a.
Right, right.
Well, I only have 4 pages, but they're small pages. I completely agree with, being able to explore and manage, our own corridors, doing planning studies independently of CNDI where it makes sense. And exploring the option to manage projects in-house, I think that goes hand in hand. So would that mean that NCTD has a larger role in communicating directly with the municipalities and the county to be able to do those? Do we have like a staff person that's gonna be in charge
Yeah.
of being that liaison?
I think it will. I think, they're probably already doing some of that anyways, because I think what happens is they hear about a project from the NPO, and then the first place they come is to NCTD to sort of qualify that information. So I don't think it would necessarily be too much out of the realm of what we're doing now, it would just be more of us being in the front seats at class.
Okay, and just, with that, I think the freeze, speed and reliability study that's gonna come out would be a good place to have those conversations with the county and the municipalities to see where there are opportunities. Not all the cities in North County are currently, friendly to bus rapid transit, priority signaling and stuff like that, but that's a huge opportunity to ensure that, we can grow our ridership, and have that reliable, quick, frequent service. I'll skip positive train control. So I completely agree with the actively and aggressively finding grant opportunities. I'm curious to see if the direction that you're thinking is, looking at disadvantaged communities, since that's where you can potentially receive a lot more state and federal funding. And if that's gonna be a plan for us to look at in our territory or service area, where disadvantaged communities are, where we can grow ridership by having those connections, whether it's, working with the municipalities or the county to do the ATP infrastructure necessary to safely get to a bus stop, right? Bus shelters, all that kind of stuff that could fall in our realm. But I think there's a lot of opportunity to help out and have be like co-applicants even. And that would get to the other point of ensuring community benefit from project opportunities. 100% in agreement with sprinter replacement and funding now. What I would be really interested in seeing is even, board members, we want pictures. So an infographic that would show kind of what we would need to do in the long term, because if we get a different type of locomotive, we might have to do platform redesign because they're a little thin. So I would love to see from staff, like what the different barriers and opportunities that we have, right? So we can talk about that later, but just wanted to put that in there. When you talk about understanding workforce and then affordable housing, is that getting to the point that board member Kinsey and myself have made that, we do need to start looking at workforce housing for our folks? Is that part of that?
I think it's all of it.
Okay,
I think what we recognize is that there's a critical need for public transportation for essential workers, but not if they don't live in North County.
right.
Right, so how are they getting to the public transportation system? Provide the system to get to work, either they're not in the county or they're far east or they're north, and we want to try to make sure that we're working with developments that we think about how we're able to retain workforce in North County.
Awesome. And just to add to that, it's important too, as folks are using more of their own mobility, like e-bikes, right? There are times on the Sprinter and on the coaster where it's very difficult to find a place to put your bike. So, that is only people are adopting e-bikes faster than they're adopting EVs. So I just want to put that on our radar. If we are looking for new locomotives, right, we need to make sure that we have enough space for peak times. On the access to jobs, education, and healthcare, Palomar Airport Road to San Marcos Boulevard, if you see on the studies, right, that's a huge job corridor. It is incredibly difficult to utilize public transit. I appreciate, Vice Chair Patel bringing that up, that Carlsbad doesn't really have a good busing system. So I just want us to be really forward thinking about how we're gonna connect folks to those, because that's outside of Sorrento, that's where a lot of folks in my city and in the cities in North County are going to that area, right? And it's not very friendly right now to biking, walking, and taking public transit. And I'll also say that about the Cal State San Marcos station. It would be great to have multimodal that really connects that station to the campus. There's not a separated bike lane there. Anyways, and I did trip and fall, doing that walk at 7 a.m. in the morning, just a few weeks ago. Also, on YOP, the verification process, I want us to see what we can do to reduce barriers. It's already difficult enough for folks to get verified when they have a easy way to get to the verification. So more pop-up events and potentially eliminating the verification process or making it very simple is going to be critical to continue the success on YOP. And I will also just say that our superintendent at this Unified School District, Matt Doyle, is very supportive of school trippers. If we haven't had a conversation, I'll talk to you offline about that, but I did promise him a conversation. We were able to get a really great route to Rancho Minerva Middle School. And the last thing I want to highlight on Board Member Garcia, I completely am in agreement with that the SUV transit station is unsafe. But that I also agree too on the ocean side, brightening the transit platform. Even some of the bridges that we have, it's incredible to have the nature around, but it feels unsafe to enter the bridge and go, like, if I'm getting off at College Boulevard and I want to go get a quick bite to eat, just the distance from getting on the platform to where the restaurants are, it feels incredibly unsafe. And that's all.
Well, thank you for those comments, and I appreciate that you provide frequently and have a different level of comments that we will. So the explorability and managed corridor planning studies independently. So this was our SANDAG kind of thing. So we don't have the ability to manage even small scale projects independently. We have to go through SANDAG, which takes time, and those delays that are caused by that are sometimes cost money or aren't satisfying our customers' needs. So it's something that we'd like to work with SANDAG staff. Just wanted to bring that to your attention. And the Coastal Fair Dome, I'd like to learn more about that. And okay. And then Board Member Robinson, the educational facility, touched on why we actually and Board Member concerns as well. Are there microtransit opportunities there or circulator opportunities?
I think there always are. I think one of the conversations that we had was, where does microtransit make sense? How do you incorporate it in? And I think what we sort of talked about in the past meeting, which is, yes, we can add it on, or if we see it's a need for that versus another type of service, we can help shift. It sort of depends on what need is. Every city is a little different on why they want microtransit, why they don't, or why it's every one of them is very situational. Is that a correct answer?
Thank you. So agenda item 4 is an update on exciting projects and initiatives that MTQ is undertaking. Before we go there, Madam Clerk, would it be appropriate to help people grab their lunch and eat at the table?
Yes, that would be
Okay. And so
Just to note, this one is not too incredibly long. The reason we built in an hour for lunch was so that we had time to walk back to the bus 6 and 20 minutes an hour and ride out to our youth operations center. So that's not necessarily the last piece that we have on the agenda is more something to give you to take with you. I think to the conversation we've been having about meeting with city staff. We want to leave you with something to take back to your city staff so that when we get together, we can really focus our energy on what does your particular city want from us in the long skip scenario. It's a little bit less of a workshop, even though it says that. It's more about at 50,000 foot level, here's some ideas of things we're thinking about, and every city has different needs, so take that with you when you talk to staff. And then when we get into those quarterly or twice a year meetings, we want to be able to really just jump right into that
Planting seeds.
plant and seed. Yeah.
Planting seeds. Okay, so if you're hungry, please go start. And, while that's happening, do you want to?
We get to wait till everybody gets back.
Okay, so everybody, let's grab food and we'll come back and start the live operation.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody. So here we are at the Iowa floor. Again, it's an update on the exciting projects and initiatives that CT is undertaking. Our CEO, Sean Donaghy, will be back here again, along with his sponsor, our Chief Development Officer.
Thank you, Chair. This won't take too incredibly long. Tracy is here with me to talk about any of the projects if anybody has questions about it. But it's kind of a basic update of a couple things where we're at. We've tasked the marketing team to look at a couple things in terms of our branding. We've talked to, we've got a couple of special events coming up over the next year, which we'll talk a little bit about that are significant to the agency milestones. So first piece we'll kind of jump into is project updates. On the rail side, we've got the convention center platform right next to Passcode Park in the convention center. Those things are still being worked on right now, but it's a pretty big deal for us. We're excited about that. The San Diego double track and the Vadaquitas Lagoon double track. Sprinter vehicle replacements, which we've already talked about, is a big initiative for us, and that sort of feeds into the other piece on the rail side, which is Sprinter headways. We'd love to get to a space where we have 15-minute service in that corridor. And the only way I'm really able to do that is through the Sprinter double track modifications and some of the vehicle replacements along in the Sprinter fleet. Tracy, again, you want to add to that?
I would just add on the convention center, we're nearing final design on that. So we're looking to go to construction next year at the very beginning of the year and should have open for business for that one safe ride for the Ocean side coming 2026.
Wow. Yeah.
Not 2025. Maybe do this a little untraditionally. Does anybody have any questions for Tracy on the rail piece while we're on the rail? Okay. On the facilities piece, we're getting ready pretty soon to break ground on our hydrogen fueling station. Once we're able to do that, it'll be a few months for that station to be put into play, and then we will have hydrogen trucked in liquid form, which we will turn over into gas form when we fuel the buses. We're pretty excited about that. We did get some state money and some federal money. I think that was, we got a little federal money too. So we're pretty excited about that station kind of kicking off. Battery electric bus chargers. And when we go over to the east facility, you'll see it right across the street where our electric avenue is. There's pretty decent sized infrastructure just in the small amount of buses we have that are electric. I think the example I gave at the PATH committee meeting and maybe the board meeting was in a past life, we put 10 buses into the system. We had to upgrade our electric to a 25K just for those 10 buses. So I mean, anytime you start getting into the battery electric sphere, you have to talk about demand charging. You have to talk about what happens when the system gets spiked. You have to talk about all these things that sort of impact that and can have really a longer term impact on the budget from a fuel perspective. Wayfinding and bus stop improvements. Our facilities team is getting ready and has done some great job on bus stop improvements. We've got some grants out for those right now also that we would like to see come in so that we can add shelters and do some things at our bus stops. But wayfinding is a big deal for us. We have a lot of cross routes in the system, and I think a way for us to do those for those who don't have access to a smartphone or applications and maybe have some difficulty with the turn sheets or the tables that we have at some of those cross routes. We want to put in some better wayfinding, not only at the transit centers, but along the routes themselves. And then on the operations facility piece, and we'll talk a little bit about this today when we're taking the tour, but I've been out to almost every facility with our facilities team. We've written down quite a few things that need to be overhauled at a lot of our facilities. I think because a lot of our operations have been contracted out for the past decade, we probably haven't put the energy that we need to into overhauling our facilities. And that's not necessarily, in all cases, big ticket dollar items. Some of it is, it hasn't been painted in years. Ceiling tiles need to be replaced. We need new lighting over there. Maybe safety lighting in the rail bays or in the bus bays, the main street. So we're walking through and we're kind of gathering all the information we need so we can buy all that stuff in bulk and just start to get facility to facility and do a little bit of a refresh. Carpet, office equipment, some of our facilities, and you'll see when you get in there, been a quick minute since we've done anything in stock. It's got a real, some case 80s, 90s vibe to it. So if you were living your best life in the 90s, you're probably going to love a couple of our facilities. On the redevelopment side, and I'll let Tracy kind of run with this one, but the Oceanside Transit Center, we're very excited about that. The Carlsbad stations, plural, because we've got a few. Escondido Transit Center, which we'll talk a little bit about today when we get out there, and not just the development that's happening potentially into the future, but things that Oceanside and Escondido that we want to do right now to improve. Some of the conversation we had earlier about safety and security, having visibility, and then the Vista stations. Tracy, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll just. Related to Oceanside Transit Center, this one's pretty exciting to where we're at right now. If you recall, we started this process back, no, that's a nice little visual there. We started the project with an RFP just as the COVID and, have been working our way through this process. So we're nearing the corner. A draft EIR is going to be coming out from the city in the next few weeks. And hoping to get, Toll Brothers is hoping to get to Planning Commission and City Council by the end of this year. So we're getting closer and closer, but a lot of community outreach has been performed on this project. Talking to people to try and incorporate, what the community would like to see. There's a lot of also, just as a reminder to some people who might not know, there's a lot of public benefits for this site, bringing our bus island closer to our platforms so that people don't have to have that big long trek from the northern end of the site down to our rail platform. So that adjacency will be there. Customer service center, and of course our new administration. We still have some discussions to have on community center in that area, and we're continuing to work through it. Related to Carlsbad stations, those are both in the due diligence process. The Carlsbad Village, particularly you've heard of Carlsbad Village Trench Project. And so we're furthering an analysis of that trench project so that we can get to the concrete footprint to the developer so that they can maximize their development area. So that analysis will be taking place in the next several months. Poinsettia, we have a few challenges with some vertical and some conservation easements in that area that we're continuing to work through with the city and with the developer. Escondido Transit Center, we are in the due diligence, looking at design, working with our planning group on making sure that we are putting transit first on this and making sure all of our needs are covered. Working with that with the developer, and then lastly on the Vista station. So Civic Center, we just closed, received RFPs. We have a source selection committee that's working on that right now. So we'll be bringing that to the board in the next several months, and we're kind of holding a little bit on the Vista Transit Center just so that we can align a few other projects that we're working on, make sure that the development complements the projects and the initiatives that we want to work on.
So, we're going to some questions. So now, do we have any members of the public who would register to speak on this item?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Registration to speak on item 4 has ended. Okay. Any questions?
Are you done with that?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
That's all I call.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, you want me to?
No. This is perfect time for this.
So I-
The next one.
I have a question about Escondido as far as the facility, our facility, not the transit center side of it. About 5 years ago, maybe, we had some discussion about the physical footprint of our facility. Might need to be changed, and it dealt with the property that we didn't own. Is that redesign still
So that's
happening?
excellent. Thank you for bringing that up. We are currently, doing a study right now in partnership with the city of Escondido, a land swap study. So looking at, our property alongside the city's property and what makes most sense. So we don't have anything to report on yet, for that, but we are in the midst of that study.
Okay, and so with the redesign of that facility and some of the infrastructure we need to bring in, is that, affect how we might design that facility as far as needing to do any swapping or?
So it will all be considered as part of the study that we're looking at. The Escondido Transit Center redevelopment doesn't have anything to do with the land swap
Right.
study. It's primarily just our Sprinter operations facility and our East Division. And
I do think to your question, proximity matters, especially if we move to a hydrogen scenario.
Right.
So when we do land swaps, we are going to have to be very aware of where that station might be at a operations facility, because we can't be within X proximity of certain businesses. So if we are looking at land swaps, it might change the way that we look at where a hydrogen fueling station may be, or if there's enough electric power on the block to be able to take on more battery electric vehicles.
Okay, thank you.
Just a couple more slides, and these are just informational, so we'll run through them pretty quick, because I know we want to let you finish eating, and then we want to try to get down to the bus about to start walking that way about a quarter till. Okay. Just sort of I just put this up as a visual on a couple things we're working on. The Coast Highway Station, Cross Street, Rancho del Oro and Melrose, the bottom two, which we've already, we had at the board meeting last month. It's just kind of an example of sort of the projects and things we're looking at from a project perspective. Now that kind of feeds into what Tracy was talking about. We've got a couple of milestone updates coming up. The Coaster 30th anniversary next year, and also NCTD turns 50. And so when I first came on board, we had a lot of conversation about who NCTD is and who we want to be for kind of the next 50 years. And how do we want to celebrate those, and maybe how do we want to manage our branding a little bit. I think branding is such an important part of our agency, because we're not only a reflection of our employees but we're also a reflection of our communities and our community members and all the different communities that we serve. So we've had a lot of conversation about a refresh and an update, and our marketing team, specifically Victoria, who works as does a lot of work on all of our posters and some of our social media stuff and some of the things that we put out. This has done a phenomenal job of running with, we kind of gave her carte blanche on, hey, we've got some ideas and we kind of want you to run with it and see where it goes. We kind of want to see what we've got. From a branding perspective, we really want to focus on the district's brand. We have a lot of identifiable modes, but they're not necessarily identified with the agency. And the best example I can give you in that is, once upon a time, we built a bus rapid transit line, and they had no idea that we ran the bus rapid transit line because we called it something different. And not that we shouldn't call it something different, but we need to say it's that mode operated by X transit authority. And so going back to the communication piece, I think we've all talked about is sort of bringing all those brands together and managing them with the piece. The other piece that's a big deal for me, especially on the branding realm, is partnerships in the community. In a past life, we went so far as to wrap buses specific to the cities that we served in the district. We had someone go out and take pictures and build a bus wrap for that community, put that on a bus, put it out in service so that all of the best parts of your community are being referenced on one of our buses. So we're talking a little bit about that. The county as well, and especially the schools. I mean, we've got a very good presence here, I think, with the colleges, the community colleges, and even at the local level of our school district. So how we're managing those partnerships in real time. Mission and vision update. We haven't necessarily got to this piece yet, but it's kind of like build the next 50 years, right? Like extend the district's role in the communities we serve. I think when you look at public transit agencies, our mission statement and our vision statements are so specific to reliable, on-time performance. And I'm not going to tell you that that's not important, but we also need to be a driver for economic development and quality of life, and we need to incorporate those in our vision and our mission. So the team's working on some of those things. The one thing I get asked periodically, and just to kind of give you an idea where we are with our logos, one of the first things that we talked about when I went over to Justin's group I've probably been here, what, a week and a half or so. Yeah, and the first question I got was, how long are we gonna be DirecTV installed? And I said, and I had never thought about that until somebody said something to me. And I said, dang, that's a gift. And I think even going so far back as the San Diego Northern Railway, I mean, we sort of have these very storied historical pieces of our agency that we need to think about in terms of our 50th anniversary coming up, but maybe we need to break away from as a function of the next 50 years. So what we sort of tasked everybody to do, and Victoria absolutely slam dunked it, was we asked her to kind of take a look at representation of North County, representation of the cities that we serve, sort of the logos that the cities have in conjunction with their own flags in their cities. Sort of this idea of sun and wind and water and all the things that make North County great, plus the forward motion of public transportation. And Victoria, I think, slam dunked quite a few iterations of it for us, which was sort of this real different feel to the logo. How it kind of looks on a phone, how it kind of looks in a couple different scenarios. We haven't completely finished this up yet. We're going to actually look for a little feedback from some of our employees and sort of figure out the best way to sort of manage these, either at a sort of a pin level or what they're going to look like on letterhead. I will say that they've already started to change over, not with the logo, but sort of the old school feel of some of our letterheads, where we have the names down the side, the sort of 1980 type feel. We want some more of a more of the color scheme that we have now within the logo. And we're getting ready to redo some business cards also, just to a different kind of color scheme. If you've seen our business cards, they're a little bit loud. There's a lot of feel going on with that. But our marketing team is pretty excited about what the next 50 years for us is going to be. And then part of this is to, when we get back to the 50th anniversary, how do we incorporate all the great things that we've had over the years into what we want to do in the future. So more to come on that, but we're pretty excited about that. The marketing team, I think, sort of hit the notes on a lot of what we were looking for, and I'm excited to get some employee feedback on that, because they've come to us and talked about new uniforms and really how they want to graduate to another space. That we've been out to some of our platforms, some of our uniforms are pretty old school. They've got the old, like block patches on them. And I think what they really want to get to is a nice polo scenario with a nice pants, embroidered logo. And so we want to make sure that we try to do that in the best way possible. And that, part 4, which we can do real quick. Part 5. So we didn't want to spend a lot of time on this. So really what I want to make sure we leave you with is a tidbit on our long range plan. I think historically, when we've talked about a long range plan in a workshop, we bring the board together and we talk about things for several hours. Like we're talking 3-4 hours, if not longer, just on what do you want out of a long range plan. I think part of our initiative, and Director Jenkins and I have had a lot of conversations about this too, as it relates to the cities, is who we're getting out to, who we're seeing. I think it's been our plan for Mary and I and Tracy and I to get out to all the city staff and have conversations about what they want. So what we're really sort of going for in this scenario is, if there are things that are specific to your city that you might want to see from a public transit scenario, because everybody's different, right? Like for us to come in here and say, here's the 5 things we think we should focus our energy on from a service and planning perspective, it's probably not paying the correct amount of respect to what you may specifically want for your city. Because every city's a little bit different. And so think about, whether that's bus stop improvements, whether that's better access to rail, whether that's BRT, whether that's increased bus frequency, whatever that is. Think about that. Maybe take it back to the city staff, and then when we have our meetings with city staff, we really want to give them sort of a heads up. And we're going to email this stuff out to the city leadership also, but we want to make sure that we're there first. So there's kind of a conversation taking place in real time about what they may want. And when we sit down in person, we can really start to put things on paper, then bring it back to the board and say, from a long range perspective, here are the 2 or 3 key things we're really trying to accomplish, but here's what each city sort of wants out of that equation, so that we can manage this on a basis. And I think the bus is leaving, about 10 minutes, we need to walk down?
Yeah. Before you need a restroom break, do that, please.
Yeah, and thank you for working through the lunch. We knew we were going to be pretty tight on presentation day, but that was because we knew we were gonna have a good conversation. And I appreciate everyone's thoughts and feedback on that. That's a big deal. So,
Mr. Cole, any comments on item 5?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you. At this time for registration, item 5 is ended. Sean, thank you very much. Anyone have any questions for Sean? I think that there's one question for you before you try to eat your sandwich.
I shouldn't have left.
I know, I don't track it.
So Sean, when you go out to the different cities, if we just gonna use this as an example, if Vista is highly interested in BRT. For some, whatever, nobody else is. Then you're gonna have to kind of combine everything and look at what makes sense, because obviously you don't put BRT in one city and stop it.
Yeah, I think.
So
Oh,
how are you going to coordinate?
Yes, I think there's a couple ways we could look at that. I think historically for me, what we would look at is, this one was really interesting. Let's take here. If we were gonna talk about some type of a BRT on 303, is there a space where it's a BRT in certain cities and it just runs its regular route? Right, it's sort of a hybrid. We've done that in places where we've had dedicated lane space in places that we can put it, and not dedicated lane space where we don't. We really don't want this route. I think to your point, it's about trying to find some of these commonalities between connected cities. And if one wants something, but another one doesn't, there may be an opportunity for us to manage pieces of what that city wants within its city boundary, and then focus energy on something else that another city may want to do. Because to me, it's not I think sometimes grants and agencies make this mistake. It's not all one size fits all. It's very much what cities want to see for their citizens based on.
Great to speak to the staff. Just a heads up, sometimes council and city staff don't see eye to eye. And so we're actually going through a process like that right now, specifically the transit in Escondido. And staff is actually leaving. So just a heads up. You may, I know that you want to get in with city council so early on, but something could make its way up and make it city council. And
Okay, and I will tell you too, in relation to council, we've already done a few presentations, but if there's ever a point in time that you'd like us to come to a workshop or speak to your council, we can do that pretty much on a pretty quick notice. You know, especially if there's something floating around out there that's not sitting well with people, we're more than happy to either come and confirm that that's correct, or tell you that maybe there's ways for us to work. I think sometimes what happens, especially when you talk about the interaction between city staff and council, I think there has to be a happy middle ground. The city's very focused on things, the staff is very focused on things that are sometimes technical in nature, rules maybe happening in the real way, and what council is hearing from the citizens is, here's how this impacts me as a citizen of the city. We need to be able to clearly explain in real time what the bigger picture is instead of just what's written down on the piece of paper.
And sometimes it's not so much the technicalities. It's more, this is what the city wants. And then we get from the residents that we don't want that. And staff is saying, yes, it is. And we're like, yeah, no.
Well, thank you for that feedback, and staff is always with board members and with council and with the staff. So we know there'll be a lot of collaboration. And the chief executive's report. And next is board member report. So you would have three of ours. Great, thank you. So next scheduled meeting was a regular board meeting. June 20th, 2024 at 11 a.m. located in the City of Oceanside Council Chambers, 300 North Coast Highway in Oceanside, and the Marketing Service Planning and Business Development, aka MISPADAS, meeting June 27th, 2024 at 1 p.m. at the NCPD facility located at 311 South Fremont Street, where we started today. This meeting is adjourned.